manage as a family in building such a world. Thank you so much.
You outlined well, I think, the concept of these 2 days. We're going to, maybe I should tell you. Yeah.
Stress the importance of family. At the UN, as you mentioned, Heiner, we really don't use the word family very much, except for in family planning. Family is not included in the MDGs, and it's very questionable if we're going to include the family in the Sustainable Development Goals. It's perplexing, right? I mean, I think we in the room have an understanding of the utter importance of the family. You know, it's just, why are we missing the point? Is it so close to us that we don't see it? Yeah, if we look at the conflicts in the world, all the injustices, and what's the bottom level of all the injustices and conflicts, it is an essential breakdown of human relationship. It's lack of empathy, lack of values, lack of principle, right? Where do we get this from? Oh, that's really, what is the human being, and how is the human being fulfilled greatest potential? We exclude the family, which is where consciousness develops, morals, empathy. We are excluding, we're taking away the main source of the problem within humankind. The source of the human problem is the human heart. Universal Peace Federation works to establish peace, build reconciliation through interreligious dialogue, international dialogue, collaboration, and education. And one of our core principles is that marriage and parenting in the family are foundations, the foundations for sustainable human development, and the very cells for building society. We recognize that the greatest human achievement is our spiritual development, is our moral development. It really simply is, our greatest human achievement is our ability to perfect our love. The greatest path for spiritual development is relationships, and first and foremost in the family, through every relationship, as a child, to a parent, sibling to sibling, certainly as a spouse, and parental heart, and also a grandparent. I just became a grandparent. I'm 6 months. So again, we're sort of redefining not just marriage and family, but redefining the human being, and we don't want to forget the essence of the human being is the spiritual, moral quality of compassion and love, and acting out of principle, and having tuned to a higher purpose in our lives. So, as Heiner says, we have to focus not just on family in terms of our moral development, but the most vulnerable, the most dependent is children. We really have to ask what's best for children. And it is the married mother and father committed in love to each other and to the child. The resources are just consistent, robust. Now, I understand it causes some difficulty because it's seen as being judgmental or demeaning of many of those that do an exemplary job of raising children in very difficult situations and situations that are not ideal. It's very important to appreciate that really all of us fall short. All of us. None of us got the support, the education, etc. we need to have a strong family. So, but still, if we don't look at the ideal, how are we ever going to improve? So let's not be intimidated by talking about the ideal, and let's look at our own faults and needs for improvement. Okay, so what is going on with our children in the world? 1 out of every 4 adolescents in the United States is currently at serious risk for not achieving positive, productive adulthood. 21% of United States, American children from 9 to 17 have diagnosable mental or addictive disorder associated with at least minimum impairment. Current generation of young people is more likely to be depressed and anxious than was its parent generation. We are declining in the well-being of children. 20% of students report having seriously considered suicide in the past year. And in terms of the world, are we seeing increasing youth violence? Absolutely. Worldwide, some 250,000 homicides occur among youth, 10 to 29 years old. Each year, 41% of annual total number of homicides globally. So we have a problem with violence, angry youth. In the United States, even though we're doing well materially, how we see deteriorating mental and behavioral health, high rising rates of depression, anxiety, attention deficit, conduct disorders, et cetera, et cetera. We're not doing so well. The main risks for youth violence, according to World Health Organization, is all of them listed basically point to the top. Low level of attachment between mothers and fathers and children, parents and children. My main point in my talk is we are relational beings, spiritual beings. We're hardwired to connect. We need stable, secure attachment to fulfill the human potential that you're have. Okay, so the solution, the World Health Organization evaluated different programs trying to alleviate this big problem of youth violence. The solution is parent and family-based interventions are among the most promising strategies for producing long-term reductions in youth violence. The family is the solution, whereas counseling and gang prevention programs have been ineffective. The answer is, again, going back to strengthening that bond between parent and child within the family. Parents are hardwired to connect to their children. Oxytocin and prolactin in pregnancy, birth, and breastfeeding enhance the maternal bonding. The oxytocin is that nurturing, natural opiate that bonds parent to child. Very important. Interesting, though, the research is that the father living with the mother is impacted by the pheromones that she puts off. And don't tell young guys this, but it decreases their testosterone, increases their oxytocin, and primes them to bond to their child and protect the child and provide for the child and make a commitment to caring for the child. And we all know that marriage helps make that relationship stable. It cements that commitment to the mother and to the child. Again, we have to put children well-being first. I already mentioned that there's so much research pointing to the fact that children raised in intact married families are more likely to do better academically, health, mental. It just is, again, repeated over and over again. We can't deny the facts. Now, mothers and fathers do parent different. This is a little extreme about what guys do, but the fathers are more fun, I have to admit, right? It's not all socialized. Mothers and fathers do contribute different qualities, different strengths to their children. And children receive gender-specific support from having a mother. So we know from infancy, there's so much about secure attachment for infants that it primes you to trust, to learn, have have better relationships when you're older, throughout life. But adolescents also need genuine attachment. And I think we've made a big mistake in ignoring how much adolescents need attachment to their parents. The hardwiring in us, we want to be attached, we want to belong. We find out who we are as adolescents through our relationships. If we don't have a strong bond with our parents, we have the same natural impulse for connection, so we go to our peers. Our peers do not have the maturity to guide us. They don't care long-term about us, and we get that as influence. That is our main influence as an adolescent. And that's why we see so many parents complain, like, why is he always on the phone? Why is he spending so much time with his friends? How come he doesn't have time to have a conversation with him at dinner? It's a serious problem because actually they've replaced that attachment to us, or it should be, to peers. And we see a lot of disaster in this area, right? Okay, so what do teenagers go to in this world that is highly sexualized? So many children, and this study, according to CDC, is that nearly half of all high school students in the U.S. report having had sexual intercourse. Now, sexual intercourse actually produces those wonderful hormones that naturally bind and connect and attach you. It increases your trust. But in early and multiple relationships, that wonderful connection that comes from hormones and creates emotional binding is kind of worn out and weakened. So when it comes to being married, sex doesn't have the purpose, doesn't have the natural glue that it's supposed to have. And this obviously can lead to a weakening of marriage. And it's really, we're not being honest with our children if we kind of go along with the sexualization of our culture and the sexualization that is in comprehensive sex education at the UN. And not teach them about how to have genuine relationships, because again, that's fundamentally who we are as human beings. People that want love and connection. Don't replace it, not to replace it with sexual relationships. Fundamentally, we are relational, but also we're moral, and we thrive when we know there's purpose and meaning. 2 minutes, thank you. So we're biologically hardwired for attachments, but also we need more purpose and meaning. And where do we learn that? We learn that in the family. The beginning of morality is primed in close, genuine relationships with parents. It's the essential foundation of conscience, moral meaning. Just as we teach children how to talk by talking, we teach children how to love by loving. This is Jean Piaget. The child spontaneously attributes to his parents perfections, or I have to say imperfections, and abilities which he will later transfer to God if his religious education gives him the possibility. We learn so much about love and the universe and how we connect and what's important in the very foundation of the parent-child relationship. So the natural order of the family teaches also natural social order. There is hierarchy and there is purpose and higher purpose in the world. And also, it teaches how to live for a higher purpose. Relationships based on self can't work. Marriages that are focused on a higher purpose of procreation, building a better society, you're not going to be so focused on self. And that helps enrich the family. Also, adults need attachment. So we need to take care of our marriages. I teach marriage education. I'm so grateful that Richard Kane is here and Harry Benson. Wonderful educational programs. We can make our marriages better. We can teach our young people how to have better relationships. A lot of marriages fail, but it's not because we didn't buy the house, or we didn't go to the vacation, or splits, whatever. It's really fundamental because there's lacking of human connection and attachment. We need to address that. So the family is essential. We have to go back to enrich it, understand the purpose, proclaim the purpose, do better in our own lives, and certainly, as you all are doing, really, in all your aspects, keep on fighting the good fight to remind us all how essential the family is. Thank you very much.
Very rich, and I'm sure you have questions or points that you want to make. Please go on about that. Now, our next speaker is, as already mentioned, Richard Kane. I'm very grateful that he came. He came actually from Bangkok directly. He didn't even go home. He didn't have time. We grabbed him and brought him here. So he represents the Marriage Week International. And Marriage Week International, actually I got to know that this is actually an organization that its head office is in Switzerland. So I'm glad that I discovered this great organization through coming here. So please, you have the floor. 12 minutes, but we'll talk.
Thank you very much. I think I'll just stand up if I may. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Well, it's very nice to be here. I love Switzerland. I come in quite often. The first time I ever came, I was 21 and I drove here for Christmas and spent the week skiing in the Bay area. And on the way home, which was Sunday, January the 1st, the windscreen on the car smashed before we left Switzerland. And yet we still drove all the way through France in the snow and ice to get back to England with no windscreen. So that sealed my love affair with Switzerland from an early age. I live in England with my wife. We live in a cross-cultural marriage. She's a woman, I'm a man. But no, genuinely, it is cross-country because she is a Swedish girl and I'm an English man, and we've been married for 27 years. And during that time, I think she's been married to at least 4 different versions of me. As years go by, and you know, when you start out and you make this big promise, you don't really know who your spouse is going to turn into. So, but that's part of the fun, isn't it? I think it is anyway. So we started the Marriage Week almost accidentally nearly 20 years ago. I've been promoting the idea of Marriage Week for 20 years now in the UK and internationally for almost 10 years. And the idea of Marriage Week is very simple. We just try to galvanise the media, churches and faith groups, and the government to convey positive messages about the benefits of marriage to society for 1 week a year. And we do it for 1 week because it would be difficult to get all those people to work together for 52 weeks a year. But for 1 week a year, they can kind of bury the hatchet a little bit, if you understand my terminology. And so the project now, to my utter amazement, is running in 24 countries all around the world. The reason why I was in Asia was I was presenting it to family ministry leaders from all those countries. And our goal is to get up to 100 countries by the end of the decade. And I'm pleased to report that in 2014, between 1.5 million and 2 million people actually turned up and physically turned up at a Marriage Week event somewhere in the world. And those events will be really primary preventative programs. So it'll be a marriage education program, or a renewal of vows, or just a communication workshop, or just anything. Because the premise is that the way to help couples is to help them to be intentional about their relationships. And they may come along to something in a church and think to themselves, oh, we're just going to have a little talk and a glass of wine or something. But without them realising it, they become intentional with each other when they do that. And then they may go on to some kind of program. So it's really the primary preventative end of things. So that's me, that's what I'm all about. I'm a great supporter of marriage, I'm a fan of marriage. I understand the realities of marriage. I know it's not always easy. but I do know that it's the best environment to raise a child. You know, if you were a child being born today in Geneva, and you could choose, you would always choose to be born into a family where your parents were married. Because that way you would get the best prospects, like educationally, on a social level, relationally, every level. And yet, at the same time, we need to be compassionate for couples who live together and are unmarried. Because quite often, the reason why they cohabit is they like the idea of marriage, but they're not quite there yet. So their intentions are good, but accidentally they fall for a counterfeit of what the marriage really is. It's not intentional, it's like a mistake. It's like, for example, I have here a very nice pen, it's a Mont Blanc pen. Hands up if you know how much they cost. It's a really expensive brand. I bought this in Bangkok 2 nights ago for €2. Is it the real thing?
I don't think so.
I don't think so. I think it's a counterfeit, but it works fairly well. My point is, couples who cohabit, you know, they do so, and unintentionally they fall for the counterfeit. They're not intentionally being subversive. Their intention is good, but they mistakenly think it's the same. Because let's be honest, folks, from the outside looking in, if you're married or you're cohabiting, it looks the same. From the outside looking in, you know, the couple clearly share a bed together, they eat the same food, they perhaps drive the same car, it looks the same. So in order to understand what's happening in the different kind of relationships, we have to turn to the academics and researchers. It's great to have some of our friends here and others, and I know I'm surrounded by academics, and I don't pretend to be an academic, but I do know that, for example, Scott Stanley, his research into this area is fascinating, because he's established that what happens when a couple choose to move in together is that very often for the woman, she thinks, I have a long-term future with this man. I'm thinking like, I can see us in the future with a life together, and I like the look of that. She's there already. But the man, to my shame, because I'm a man, the man's thinking something different. He's thinking like, this is great. I get lots of sex, I get my laundry done, and then terribly, he thinks, and I get to keep my options open. Thinking perhaps a better person will come along. And that's why, you know, in my culture in England, everybody always says, oh, the wedding's the special day for the woman, which of course it is. But folks, the wedding day truly is the special day for the man. Because it's when he stands there for his friends, his neighbours, his colleagues, and he makes that public statement. That's the moment when he clicks in to the marriage in a big way. That's really important for him. I was on a trip with some guys a couple of years ago, and one of them, he said to me one night, what do you do for a living, Richard? And I knew this guy had been in a marriage which had failed, and now he's cohabiting with somebody else. And I said to him, I thought, crikey, you know, I had a friend and now he's going to hate me. But I explained to him what I did, and he sort of clammed up a little bit. And we had a chat. And then the next evening, over a drink, he told me that him and his partner had had a child together. And they'd done a naming ceremony for the child in the garden of their house. And so I kind of thought, this is interesting. So I said, what did you do in the naming ceremony? He said, well, all our friends and neighbours came along, and our colleagues, and we held up the child. This is a person who hasn't got any faith, I need to say. They held up the child, and they promised to look after the child for the rest of their lives. And I said, because I knew it was coming, I could tell. I said, what else did you do? And he said, well, we promised ourselves to each other for the rest of our lives too. So I said to him, friend, mate, you just accidentally got married. And he kind of, in a moment, his face, he lit up, because deep down it struck a chord with him. So even though he had this thing, oh, I've been in a marriage before and it didn't work, I'm anti-marriage, when I told him he'd accidentally got married, it slipped out. And then I was pleased to hear within a year they actually had got married as a couple. And I like to think that my little encouragement was perhaps a step on the way for him and his wife in their journey. So if marriage is so special, why is it so special? That's the key thing. Well, 97% of 16-year-olds whose families are intact are from a married family. That's a really high percentage in the UK. And I presume these cross over elsewhere. And that's really significant. But also, for 9 out of 10 babies born into an unmarried family, that unmarried family will be broken by that child by the time that child is 16. So you've got two very different, very stark comparables there, which are really significant. So why is it the case? Well, we talked about from the outside looking in, which I think is really interesting. And we talked about Stanley, and I know that Harry and others are going to be talking about some of his research later on, and I think their understanding of it is really fantastic. Well, you know, in my country, we're really good at rituals and ceremonies. We have the Queen, you know, we have the state opening Parliament. We do all these things really well. We're not very good at football. Not anymore. Terrible. I just want to leave the room now. But we do like these things really well. Okay. So for example, if you were a graduate from Cambridge University, which is one of the top 5 universities in the world, when you go forward to receive your degree from the Vice-Chancellor, you kneel before him, and in Latin you beg for your degree, in a robe. So you wear funny clothes, you speak funny words, and you evoke a tradition which goes back thousands of years. Now when you marry, you wear funny clothes, you speak funny words, you make odd vows, in an assembly of goodness knows how many people. A marriage in the Church of England is an open meeting, it's not private, anybody can wander in and watch. So you make a public statement before everybody there, and your statement is clear and unambiguous, and you evoke thousands of years of history, and you stretch it forward to something that you are communicating, you believe is going to convey you for the rest of your life. You also are part of a written record. So in my country, if you want to know who married who, hundreds of years ago, you can go to the church register and you can look it up. It's there in writing. Now, friends, a couple that just move in together, no matter how nice they are to each other, that is never going to look and feel like anything like that, is it? That is significant, those external constraints, the history, the ceremony, the ritual, the words, they are really significant in the life of a person. That's one of the key reasons why marriage is really distinctive. We're really very good at that. Compared to, for example, the Swedish experiment. Have you heard of the Swedish experiment? Perhaps you haven't heard of it in these particular words. But for years and years, as long as I can remember, in terms of social policy and outcomes, people have always talked about, well, in Sweden they do this, and the Swedish experiment this, and all the rest of it. I was speaking at a conference in Helsinki this time last year, the European Christian Political Foundation, and there was a Swedish MEP there, Member of Parliament, and she said, the Swedish experiment hasn't worked. She said, everybody in the world turns to Sweden and says, oh, you know, it's really good the way it works there. But she said, for example, she said in Sweden, they have this thing where the children have to go into kindergarten really early, okay, at age 18 months, 2 years. Those children, now that they're adolescents, they all have hearing problems because when they were so young, it was so noisy, their ears have been damaged. And that is, I suggest, replicated also on a number of other levels as well. And so, finally, there's lots more I could say, but I'm speaking again tomorrow, I think. But I'd just like to leave you with a final question, if I may, which is that, you know, we assume in the West that everybody else in the world, they want to be like us. We have a real arrogance about this. You know, we export, you know, democracy and you know, an understanding of human rights and philosophy and all the rest of it. And I think a lot of these countries, they find a lot of what we offer appealing. But I would like to suggest that one of the reasons why there is such a rise in militant religious expression is because there's a lot of these people that are really conservative, and they're scared that their grandchildren are going to end up being really liberalised as a result of adopting the West worldview. And so for those of us who are great advocates of peace, it's a really interesting thing to consider. Perhaps one of the reasons why there's such a rise in extremism from other areas of the world is that these people are afraid that if they adopt a Western worldview, within a couple of generations, their children will look like our children. And they don't want that to happen. Because everybody who's a liberal, they are a liberal until it comes to considering what their own children and grandchildren will look like. Then they turn into conservative. Thank you very much.
If I may interject just one small point, Boko Haram means Western education, right? So maybe that's the point. Yeah, I'm not saying that. Anyway, our next speaker I know fairly well for 30 plus years. Anyway, Carolyn will speak. We'll have a PowerPoint, and yeah, I hope. What should I introduce more? I mean, everybody knows it already. Usually, if I introduce myself, I'm Carolyn's husband, then everybody says, aha. But the opposite is not really the case. Anyway, she's my wife. So. Anyway, Carolyn is president of Women's Federation Europe, and she's also head of the WFWP International NGO office, UN offices. Carolyn, you have the floor, 12 minutes, straight.
Thank you. I think, can everyone hear me okay? If I stand up? For the microphone too, for the, is it okay? Yeah, okay. I wanted to, because we're in Geneva, and because we had this recent resolution on protection of the family, I wanted to focus my presentation, family, a place where human rights values meet peace and human development. And I would say perhaps the most important critical juncture where these points come together. Just to maybe quickly look at something that was recently said by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon on the International Day of Family celebration this year, which is the 20th anniversary of this, the inauguration of this day. He recognizes that the importance of the family is in the first quote, but also the link between this, as Lynn mentioned, the link between this family, our local peace-building location, family, and the human family, the world peace family that we're all striving towards. Also, he made the point that how important the functioning of families are in order to solve, these are 3 or 4 of the key points that the UN is working on at this point: reducing poverty, maternal health, gender equality, and just human rights in general. Maybe I should. Oh, the microphone. Okay, maybe I'll change this. Okay. Hello? Yeah. So, a look at family. As Lynn mentioned, oddly, family, this very important rung in the ladder towards world peace, oddly, family is oftentimes left out. But again, as my husband said, it seems like maybe this is the moment when we can bring that in to the picture. UN Charter refers to human family all the time. I mean, several times, as well as many other conventions and documents in national governments, as well as at the United Nations, really talks about the family as being this goal that we are striving towards. So there must be some link there to protecting our families. So what kind of family could be that microcosm of a culture of peace? So sorry, there's so many points here, but maybe this is one of the more important slides. What is a healthy family? A citizen is considered healthy when he or she is not a burden but a contributor to the whole in all aspects: talents, experience, time, a kind of natural ecology. But similarly, families are assets when they are bequeathing the benefits of that family peace or that environment to the community around them, and the values learned and lived in families should guide those members to really make that contribution from the earliest ages. If families are consumed with needs of self-maintenance, then maybe they need protection, sometimes just temporarily. Why? Because they aren't living up to the potential of providing greater value, which is that definition of family. Some modern trends in family form, although they may be real, actual, they cannot always be seen as being the optimal form. And so we have to, as Lynn said, we have to keep in mind that there is some kind of optimal form. And as you mentioned too, when we get married, we are not anticipating a breakdown. We are assuming and hoping that things will go well. And then also, as Lynn mentioned, we can build a culture of peace only where there is incentive to greater cohesion, greater inclusion at each level. So maybe just to take a moment, because we are here about this historic first Human Rights Council resolution on the protection of family, just passed a few days ago. I think maybe this is less important, but these are some of the points from the sort of the preamble of this. And making, I think, all the points, again, many of the points that we have been talking about here today. But we know there were critics, and if you were in the room at the time of the vote last Thursday, if anyone says that this resolution has no value or was unimportant because anyway it's only sort of anticipating the holding of a panel next Human Rights Council, then you did not experience what happened in that room. It was really a fight. It was really a fight to make these points and to make this vote, and really up until the very end, no one was really sure if this was going to be accepted or not. Some of the critics say family should not be a subject of human rights protection. That, in other words, a group, it should be individuals within the family that should be protected, but not the family. And even I had one young girl sitting next to me who I started to get into a discussion with her about it. She said, "You should be ashamed that you want to protect the family." Okay. So it's just to say that there is some kind of a thinking and lobbying going on sometimes that actually is totally out of the realm of common sense. Human rights abuses occur within families, of course, and perpetuated against individual family members who should be protected. Of course, we know that. And the other point was, why is there no long list of these modern forms of families included? My response to the critics: families are very important units of society, as are ethnicities, as are different groups that need caring for, disabled, there are many groups in society that need support. Yet, human rights do occur in families, but would it not be wiser to think if better protected, the family could withstand attacks against its integrity, instead of denying families their right to protection? For anyway, individual members of families are being protected in other documents and in other moments, other places. And to the third point, as not mentioned specifically in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and as not mentioned specifically in Ban Ki-moon's speech on the International Day of the Family, implying whatever form they may take, instead of listing the forms, does not exclude anyone. And that fight in the Human Rights Council was as if that was not the case, actually. But that So instead, we're focusing on the entity of family rather than those kind of details for the moment. So the key point, again, I don't go into great detail because others have said it, but really, if we can really harness the family in order to solve problems, in order to build strong communities, then we will not need all these protections, actually. If we look at human rights concepts and the relationship to that, the relationship between that and families, we know that over recent history there has been an incredible evolution of what is understood to be the values of human rights and what can be protected. As I just had a discussion before the meeting with a representative from the Vatican, that we're at the point today that not only can I not say that my neighbor doesn't have the same right to me for education or, or whatever, actually, we're talking about how can we promote the right to peace? How can we promote the right to happiness, to prosperity, and what does that entail? So we've really come a long way. But the point is maybe less quick, no, there, no. The point is moving less quickly is the duties that are associated with it. So we can go through this, again, this evolution. Is my duty just to avoid infringing on another's rights? Is my duty to contribute actively towards others' rights? But how could we really create a culture where people grow up naturally feeling they want to, if they see an injustice, they feel naturally compelled to do something about it without having laws that force people not to do things like that. Because the culture of peace that we're striving for has to be that kind of a place. So again, I just put a few different points why I think that without family, it is not possible to have this kind of environment and this kind of framework and this kind of individuals who really feel naturally compelled, because that's what they learned as they were a child, that they are responsible for the next door neighbor. It is that family. It is not just my little family, but it is the worldwide family that I should feel connected to, that I should try to do something about in my daily life. Also, again, the point which I usually speak much more about is the role of women in this, and that is with the right integrity in family, with the right relationship and dignity between husband and wife. The children see that natural leadership role of women and men, different but complementary. Okay. I will skip ahead a little bit here. This is a book that I used when my children were little to teach them a little bit something about the human right to food, Article 15. If you see, you have a nice table laden with food and a nice family sitting around, but some people are like the little child standing in the desert. So if children see that, what do they want to do? They think they would like to grow up to be the kind of person who does something about it. Similarly, duties to the community. We learn Article 29, discover through the responsibility within the family to other family members, and naturally expanded in school, in community opportunities, of course guided by parents to do that. Freedom is when everyone appreciates the talents and resources of others and contribute their own talents and resources for the betterment of the world around them, which sounds idealistic, but which actually to a young child in a family sounds rather natural. So I want to propose, and this is kind of closing, a new framework of peace called familiarity, which I actually inspired by the principles of peace of Dr. Sun Myung Moon, meditating on that for a long time, would be sort of, instead of focusing so much on patriarchy, all the problems that come from there, let's, in a forward-looking way, let's think about another structure, familiarity, which would be a system in society when the family is the nexus, parents, children, extended family members cooperate according to their interdependent roles to enhance each member's value. So it's a constant, it's kind of a spherical motion within at that level, but that family contributes as a whole, and each individual member also contributes its own personal resource towards the development of larger community. becoming an intertwined network of empowered families. And then going on, we talk about governments, and that natural parental role where a masculine, feminine leadership can be seen as being very, very important and necessary. That is my eldest son, and she might be surprised, my daughter-in-law who's sitting back there with their little baby. And I just wanted to make the point about this gender roles and sharing leadership. We have weakened families. I don't want to be overly optimistic. Of course, we have problems. We all have our problems. But weakened families disrupt gender roles, and also they disrupt the possibility of the contribution to the larger good. But should we throw out the family, or should we think, let's work on the family? Let's try and understand why the family is struggling so much at this time. But it's not just economic reasons. There are other reasons that, again, were mentioned by others. Should we readjust those roles, even these gender roles, to the current trends? Or should we look to see what is the optimum as our goal and to work on prevention? And finally, this was just to close with a picture of my husband and I, because I wanted to say it also in preparing this conference, even though he was really the lead in doing this time. But it really is a great joy to do things together as a couple that you feel is somehow benefit to a larger good, or at least has the intention to be a larger benefit. So, thank you.
Thank you all the contributors in this panel. I think we have time for...
My name is Josie Hauer, and I'd just like to sort of give an example of something Carolyn said. Our agency, I'm from America, and representing the Administration for Children and Families work, and I was thinking about the domestic violence services that we fund and provide across the country, primarily to women. Of course, there's some domestic violence services, men come in, but by and large, it's women coming in because they've been acted against, usually by a male partner, married or not, and often there's children in the home. And so, of course, over the course of the services, it is common that the woman returns to a situation where there's inter-partner violence. And providing services to women is great. Of course, we have to do that. And one of the solutions is, have an exit plan and, get out if you can. But it's harder to do if you have children. And so a lot of the women over the years have said, well, do you have any services to the men? Because I want him fixed. I don't want to leave him. Can you fix him? But there are so little money given to services, to outreach to men who have chronic conflict habits. Should we just throw them away? Well, even if the social worker says, yes, he's no good, he's a lousy guy, get rid of him, still many women want to solve the situation because they don't want to break up their family. So they return to a situation which is very difficult. And so if we had this notion, I was very intrigued, as protecting the family as a rights issue, because the whole domestic violence services in America, at least, came out of women's rights, right? And that's one of the reasons why we even lowered the divorce laws. We made it easier to divorce so that women could get out of lousy marriages. They were married to lousy men who beat them, right? They didn't have to stay there. So that was framed as kind of a women's rights issue. And what you said actually made me think about this, and some of the other changes in our child welfare system that has been more actively in recent years reaching out to men and their relatives to try to find permanency and safety for children. So I really just appreciate that. I want to offer that as an example.
Great point. Any questions? You, sir?
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sergei Kondrativ from the Russian Mission. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for convening this important event, this conference on an extremely important issue. We are very grateful to you for mentioning concerns and we have common goals. And we look forward to close collaboration with you. And we've got one question to panelists. How to increase understanding of the importance of the family in the world, especially in the Western countries? Thank you.
Who of the panelists would like to take that? The question was how in the Western world we could raise awareness or a better understanding of the importance of family and to tackle this. Okay.
Just a few comments on that. I think those of us who are convinced in the traditional form of family, which probably most of us here are, we normally have a presenting problem in doing so. And the presenting problem is that we struggle to articulate a positive message without also expressing a negative message against other people who adopt a different kind of form. And so I think to answer your question, what we have to do is we have to work hard at the kind of messages that we send out. A really good example is Harry Benson here, we're going to be hearing from later on, because his foundation, despite doing hundreds and hundreds of interviews, have never allowed themselves to be drawn into the discussion and debate about the same-sex marriage issue. They've just stayed on message in terms of what do you have to do to have a happy marriage, how to make relationships successful, and all these other issues like that. And they've had a militant approach, as far as I can tell, in terms of not being drawn into other things. So they are a really good example of how to maintain a positive message, even though the media wants to draw you in elsewhere. And they also have adopted a way of communicating in a soundbite kind of way. So, for example, the message I convey in the media is quite often they say, "Oh, why do we want a marriage week, Mr. Kane?" And my answer is, well, for any couple that are fortunate enough to be in a marriage, Marriage Week is about helping them to have an improving relationship. And when you articulate something and you frame it in a very carefully constructed form, it means your opponent doesn't really have anywhere to go except to agree with you. And so just to conclude with that, as I said earlier, I think all of us here can improve on how we present what it is that we say, and we can make a decision about whether we want to be engaged on more fringy topics or not.
Thank you. It's a very important question. I'm from the United States, and my country really needs to look at how we're influencing the rest of the world. My comment would be the importance of education about relationships early on. I think we all know that education, sexual education is entering earlier and earlier on, and yet that's not what children need. I teach marriage education at the University of Bridgeport, and frankly I think it should be a required course because we teach them all kinds of skills, but the most fundamental life skill is how to relate to another human being. How do I control my own emotions so I can grow and relate to another human being? So there are wonderful programs out there. We have to lobby, we have to request as parents, we have to be more active at all levels, but the education changes the concept about marriage doesn't work, but also gives people skills how to actually handle the conflict. So these couples that are in throes with each other don't have to give up on the marriage. They learn the skills to handle themselves and their conflict. So thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have to close here the session. We are normally starting back in 10 minutes.
Family policies, holding the conference. And, can I suggest we give them a round of applause?